The rain fell in heavy silver sheets across Manhattan that morning, turning the steel and glass towers of the financial district into blurred monoliths against the gray sky. Arthur Miller gripped his daughter's small hand a little tighter as they hurried across the slick pavement, dodging puddles. His suit jacket, though carefully pressed the night before, was already damp at the shoulders. The elevator ride up to the 32nd floor felt endless, his heart pounding harder with every passing number. This was it, the interview he had prepared for all week, the one chance that could finally secure him steady work, a new beginning after years of sacrifice. Yet, as he looked down at 7-year-old Lily, her blonde pigtails slightly crooked from their rushed mourning, he felt the weight of every judgmental glance they had received from strangers along the way. He could almost hear the words they didn't bother to whisper. What kind of man brings a child to a job interview? Inside the gleaming lobby of Sterling Enterprises, the atmosphere was thick with polished ambition. Men in tailored suits adjusted their ties. Women in sharp blazers tapped quickly on their phones, eyes flashing with purpose. When Arthur entered, leading Lily by the hand, the energy in the room shifted. Conversations slowed. Brows furrowed. A receptionist at the front desk exchanged a knowing smirk with another employee, whispering loudly enough for Arthur to hear. "He actually brought a kid here? That's pathetic." Arthur pretended not to notice, though his cheeks burned. Lily pressed closer to his leg, her sketchbook clutched tightly to her chest. He crouched slightly, whispering, "It's okay, sweetheart. Just stay close, all right? Daddy just needs a little time." But before he could even approach the reception desk, a tall man in a charcoal suit stepped forward, the head of Human Resources. His lips curled in open disdain. "Mr. Miller, correct?" the man asked sharply. Arthur nodded, relieved someone recognized his name. But the relief evaporated instantly with the next words. "This is a professional environment. We cannot allow candidates to bring children into an interview. It shows a lack of seriousness, a lack of basic respect." His voice carried across the lobby, sharp enough for every other candidate to hear. Laughter rippled through the room like cruel applause. Arthur's throat tightened. He wanted to defend himself, to explain that Lily had nowhere else to go, that there had been no babysitter, no family nearby to help. But words caught in his chest. All he could do was hold Lily's hand as she blinked back tears, her small face crumpling with confusion. And then it happened. The elevator doors slid open at the far end of the lobby. Silence fell instantly, as if the very air recognized the presence of someone extraordinary. Out stepped Isabella Sterling, 32 years old. Billionaire CEO of the empire, bearing her name. Tall, elegant. Her long, wavy blonde hair flowing like gold in the fluorescent light. She walked with a poise that made even seasoned executives shrink in her presence. Her crimson heels clicked against the marble floor with authority. Her white silk dress perfectly tailored to her slender frame. Her ice blue eyes swept the room sharp, calculating, unreadable. And then they landed on Arthur, on Lily, on the humiliating spectacle unfolding in her company's own lobby. For a long, breathless moment, no one dared to speak. The HR manager froze mid-sentence, color draining from his face. Isabella's gaze narrowed slightly, her lips parting with the faintest trace of a question. And in that instant, the destiny of one single father and his little girl shifted forever. The lobby held its breath. Isabella Sterling's heels echoed like a gavel striking judgment as she crossed the marble floor, each step slicing through the tension. The HR manager stammered, suddenly aware of how small he looked under her gaze. Arthur straightened his shoulders, but his grip on Lily's hand trembled. Isabella's eyes lingered on the child, her small, trembling frame, the sketchbook clutched as if it were armor. Something unreadable flickered across the CEO's flawless face. Then she turned to the gathered crowd, her voice low, firm, carrying the weight of command. "Is there a problem here?" The room fell silent. Arthur's fate now rested on a single decision, hers. Would she cast him aside like the rest of the world had? Or would she dare to rewrite the rules of power in that glass tower? Arthur Miller had once been a man of quiet promise. In his 20s, he was the kind of engineer colleagues described as the one who would go far. He had a sharp mind for structures, for finding elegant solutions to complicated problems. But when his wife Emily fell gravely ill, Arthur made a choice that forever altered his path. He left the long nights of corporate offices, the steady climb of promotions, and devoted himself entirely to caring for her. For 3 years, he juggled hospital corridors, mounting bills, and sleepless nights. And when Emily's body finally gave out to the cancer that had consumed her, Arthur was left with nothing except for a 6-year-old daughter with wide eyes and a world suddenly stripped of security. He had no savings. His house was gone, sold to cover medical costs. Brooklyn became their haven, though in a much smaller apartment than before. He took whatever jobs he could: handyman work, tutoring math, repairing neighbors' old appliances, anything to put food on the table. But those weren't careers, those weren't futures. They were patches on a life that desperately needed rebuilding. Through it all, Lily became both his anchor and his reason. She was a bright child, with hair the color of sunlight, and a laugh that could lift the heaviest of days. She carried her sketchbook everywhere, filling it with drawings, houses with crooked roofs, flowers bigger than trees, and people who always seemed to be smiling. Her art was a window into a world she wanted to live in, one far gentler than the reality her father shielded her from. But Lily noticed things. The way Arthur's shoulders sagged when he thought she wasn't looking. How his hands sometimes shook as he counted coins at the end of the month. The way he pressed a reassuring smile even when there was nothing reassuring to say. She knew he was tired, that the weight of the world rested entirely on him. And she wanted, in her small way, to make him proud. Arthur's love for her was endless, but love didn't pay rent. Nor did it impress employers. His resume had a gap the size of Emily's illness, and in the cutthroat rhythm of Manhattan, mercy was rare. That's why today mattered more than anything. The interview at Sterling Enterprises wasn't just another chance, it was the chance. If he could prove himself here, doors would open again. And yet, fate had made him walk into that lobby with Lily in tow, turning his hope into a spectacle. Across from him, Isabella Sterling represented everything Arthur was not, born into wealth but hardened by circumstance. Isabella was the daughter of Charles Sterling, a man as feared in finance as he was admired. Her mother had died when Isabella was only 9, leaving her to grow up under the relentless shadow of a father who demanded perfection. While other girls had scraped knees on playgrounds, Isabella was memorizing stock reports at the dinner table. While others had gone to college parties, she had spent nights in libraries and boardrooms. She rose quickly, but not without scars. Beneath the flawless exterior, the immaculate wardrobe, the confident stride lay a woman who had never truly known gentleness. Every deal was a war, every relationship a calculation. To the press, she was the ice queen of Wall Street, a woman too beautiful to ignore and too ruthless to underestimate. To her father, she was still the child who needed to prove she was strong enough to sit at the head of the empire. But power came with loneliness. Isabella had no family dinners, no playful laughter echoing in her penthouse. Love had always been an inconvenience, something others used to weaken her resolve. Men courted her for her money, her name, never for her heart. And so she closed it off, constructing a fortress of glass and steel around herself. Yet, in that lobby, as her gaze fell on Arthur and his daughter, something shifted. She didn't see weakness in the man standing there, nor unprofessionalism. She saw something rare: devotion, a father so unwilling to leave his child behind that he risked public humiliation for her. Isabella could still recall her own childhood nights, sitting alone at a long mahogany table. While her father took calls that mattered more than she did, she remembered the ache of absence, the way she had longed for someone to look at her with the same fierce love Arthur gave his daughter in that moment. The two worlds: Arthur's struggling, Lily's innocent, Isabella's powerful but isolated, collided in the silence of that lobby. No one else understood it, but Isabella felt it instantly. This man and his daughter were unlike anything she had seen inside her empire of ambition, and though she did not yet know why, she could not look away. The HR director, a tall man named Richard Calloway, adjusted his tie with theatrical irritation. His voice rose, designed not just to dismiss but to humiliate. "Mr. Miller," he said sharply, "bringing a child to an interview demonstrates irresponsibility. This is not a daycare, and Sterling Enterprises is not a place for unprofessional candidates. You may leave." The words rang like a verdict. Heads turned, lips curled. Several of the other applicants snickered openly. One man muttered, "What a joke," while a woman in a navy suit smirked, shaking her head. Arthur felt the heat rush to his face. His jaw clenched, and 100 retorts boiled in his chest. He wanted to shout that he was as capable as any of them, that he had sacrificed more, endured more, survived more than most could imagine. But to speak would risk breaking his voice, betraying the desperation he fought to hide. Instead, he stood silently, his hand gripping Lily so tightly she winced. She looked up at him, her eyes wide and glistening, her lips trembling as she whispered, "Daddy, did we do something wrong?" That was the knife. Not the laughter, not the sneers, but the innocence in her voice. Arthur bent down, his throat thick. "No, sweetheart, never. You did everything right." Still, the sting of disgrace was almost unbearable. He could feel every gaze branding him as a failure, as though fatherhood itself were a weakness rather than his greatest strength. And then came the sound that shifted the entire room, the deliberate click of high heels against marble. Isabella Sterling. Her presence was magnetic, commanding. She did not need to raise her voice. The silence followed her naturally. Her gaze locked onto Calloway with an intensity that froze him mid-breath. "Mr. Calloway," she said coolly, "perhaps you'd like to explain to me why a qualified candidate is being dismissed in my lobby before he's even had the courtesy of an interview." The color drained from Calloway's face. He stammered, "Miss Sterling the First, this gentleman arrived with a child, which I considered unacceptable?" Isabella's voice sliced clean through his excuse. "Or merely inconvenient to your narrow definition of professionalism?" The employees scattered around the lobby shifted uncomfortably. None dared speak. Isabella's tone carried a cold fire, the kind that left no room for argument. Arthur's chest tightened. He had never been defended so publicly, especially not by someone of such stature. For a moment, he forgot the humiliation, staring instead at this striking woman who seemed carved from poise and power. Isabella turned her attention to Arthur and Lily. Her expression softened, almost imperceptibly, as she lowered her gaze to the child clutching the sketchbook. "What's your name?" she asked. Lily blinked, startled that the beautiful stranger was speaking to her. Lily," she stammered. Isabella's lips curved into the faintest smile. "That's a lovely name. And your father is here for an interview. Isn't that right?" Arthur swallowed, forcing words past the tightness in his throat. "Yes, ma'am." "Then he'll have it," Isabella declared. Her eyes swept the room once more, pinning Calloway in place. "Effective immediately. And if anyone here believes a man's devotion to his child is a weakness, then perhaps Sterling Enterprises is not the right place for you." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Calloway's mouth opened, but no words came. Isabella turned on her heel with effortless grace, gesturing toward the private elevator. "Mr. Miller, please. Follow me." Arthur hesitated, stunned. Lily squeezed his hand, her face breaking into a fragile smile for the first time that day. He took a step forward, heart thundering, realizing that his life had just tilted onto a new axis. The laughter was gone. The judgment had been silenced. And though Arthur could not yet see where this path would lead, one truth burned clear. The CEO had chosen to stand at his side. The elevator doors slid open on the top floor, revealing a corridor lined with frosted glass walls and polished steel. Arthur had never stepped foot in a place so sleek, so unapologetically modern. His shoes squeaked faintly against the immaculate floor as he followed Isabella Sterling, who walked ahead with the kind of unshakable authority that made even silence feel like an extension of her command. Arthur glanced at Lily, who clutched her sketchbook tighter, her small steps quick to keep pace. He bent down slightly, whispering, "Stay close, sweetheart. Just be quiet. Okay?" She nodded, her pigtails bouncing, but her eyes, curious and unafraid, roamed the glittering hall. When they entered the executive conference room, the contrast hit Arthur immediately. A long mahogany table, stretched across the space, surrounded by leather chairs. The panoramic windows offered a view of Manhattan shrouded in rain, the skyline blurred but still magnificent. Seated around the table were half a dozen executives, their tailored suits and steely expressions a reminder of the world Arthur had left behind. Isabella took her seat at the head of the table, crossing one leg elegantly over the other. "Mr. Miller," she said evenly. "Please, sit." Arthur lowered himself into the chair, his palms damp. He felt like an intruder in a cathedral of wealth and power. Every executive's gaze bore into him, skeptical, dismissive. The questions began. "Mr. Miller," said a stern man with silver hair, "your resume shows a significant employment gap. Care to explain?" Arthur swallowed. "My wife was ill. I stepped away from engineering to care for her until she passed. Afterward, I focused on raising my daughter." There was a pause. A woman in a navy suit arched an eyebrow. "Admirable, perhaps. But what makes you think you can return to the pace of a high-stakes environment after so long?" Arthur leaned forward, finding steel in his voice. "Because I've faced pressure most of you will never understand. When you've spent years making life-or-death decisions at 3 a.m. in a hospital, or balancing bills you can't afford while keeping a promise to a dying wife, you learn how to adapt. You learn discipline. You learn how to survive. And survival is the sharpest training anyone can have." The room fell momentarily silent. Even the executives seemed unsettled by the conviction in his words. Another leaned back, skeptical. "Engineering isn't about survival. It's about precision. Do you still have the skill?" Arthur didn't hesitate. "Give me a problem." "Any problem." The man smirked and slid a schematic across the table. It was a complex structural design, full of flaws subtle enough to trip up even seasoned engineers. Arthur scanned it, his eyes narrowing. Within moments, his pencil scratched across the page, circling errors, correcting load-bearing calculations, and suggesting reinforcements. His hand moved with confidence, born of experience, not theory. When he pushed the schematic back, the executive studied it, murmuring. One by one, expressions shifted hesitation, giving way to something like respect. Arthur exhaled, his heart racing. But before relief could settle, a small voice piped up from the corner. "Daddy forgot to label the roofline," Lily announced proudly, swinging her legs as she peered at the page. Arthur's face flushed. "Lily," he whispered. But Isabella tilted her head, intrigued. "Show us," she said gently. Lily hopped off her chair, scampered to the table, and pointed at the drawing with her little finger. "Here. If you don't label it, the builders might get confused. My teacher says labels matter." A ripple of laughter ran through the room, not cruel this time, but genuine, disarmed by her innocence. Even the stern, silver-haired man cracked a reluctant smile. Arthur's embarrassment melted into awe as Isabella leaned back, her eyes fixed on Lily. For the first time that morning, a softness touched her expression. "Attention to detail," Isabella said, her voice carrying finality. "It seems the Millers have it in their blood." The interview ended not with dismissal, but with something rarer. Possibility. Arthur rose, still uncertain of his fate. But Isabella's gaze lingered on him as she dismissed the executives. "Mr. Miller," she said quietly, "you'll hear from us very soon." And though her tone was cool, Arthur could feel the faint crack in the Ice Queen's armor. The rain had stopped by the time Arthur and Lily left Sterling Enterprises, but the storm inside the company was only beginning. That same afternoon, in the top-floor boardroom, a heated discussion erupted. Executives sat stiffly around the mahogany table, their voices sharp, their patience thin. "This is reckless," snapped Gerald Hunt, the silver-haired director of operations. His hands pressed flat against the table, knuckles whitening. "You undermined the entire hiring protocol by overruling Calloway in the lobby. It sends a message of favoritism." Isabella sat at the head of the table, serene yet immovable. Her long fingers tapped rhythmically against her tablet, her ice-blue eyes fixed on Gerald without a hint of concern. "Favoritism," she said coolly. I call it fairness. A qualified man was being humiliated in my company's lobby. I corrected the mistake. Another executive leaned forward, her tone clipped. With respect, Miss Sterling. This man has no recent track record, no references of note, and he brought a child to an interview. Do you realize how unprofessional that looks? A murmur of agreement rippled around the room. To them, the matter was obvious. Arthur Miller was a liability. But Isabella's gaze cut through the dissent. What I realize, she said, voice firm, is that talent often comes from unconventional places. This company was built by those willing to take risks, and I will not let it rot under cowardice and conformity. Her words silenced the room, but unease remained etched into every executive's face. They exchanged glances, reluctant to press further, but unwilling to yield. Gerald finally muttered, "If he fails, it will be your responsibility." Isabella's lips curved in the faintest of smiles. Then, I will take responsibility. The next morning, Arthur arrived for his first day. He wore his only good suit again, pressed until the seams begged for mercy. Lily had kissed his cheek before school, whispering, "You'll do amazing, Daddy." But the welcome at Sterling Enterprises was far from warm. As Arthur walked through the gleaming halls, conversations dimmed. Whispers followed him like shadows. "That's him," someone muttered. "The charity case." Another chuckled. "Let's see how long he lasts." Even the assistants shot him pointed looks, their polished heels clicking away as if to distance themselves. Arthur kept his eyes forward, jaw tight, refusing to let them see the sting. At his desk, he found a small stack of files waiting a trial project that was more test than assignment. The schematics were riddled with outdated data, inconsistent numbers, and ambiguous notes. It was the kind of task designed to set someone up for failure. Arthur ran his hands over the papers, steadying himself. They want me to break. They want me to give up. But he thought of Lily, of her smile when she drew her crooked houses and bright flowers. He thought of Isabella's cold, steady voice as she defended him in front of the entire lobby. And instead of fear, determination surged through him. If they wanted to test him, he would give them more than answers, he would give them brilliance. Arthur's first week at Sterling Enterprises was a crucible. The trial project he had been given was no ordinary assignment. It was a mess of outdated blueprints, conflicting reports, and nearly impossible deadlines. It wasn't a test of skill so much as a trap designed to prove the executives right, that a man like him didn't belong. But Arthur refused to yield. He arrived early each morning, his battered leather briefcase in hand, and stayed long after the offices emptied. He pored over pages of schematics, recalculating load-bearing weights, redrawing entire sections by hand when the software crashed. His eyes burned, his back ached, but he pressed on. Failure wasn't an option, not when Lily's future depended on it. At night, when most lights in Manhattan went dark, Arthur was still at his desk, scribbling notes while sipping lukewarm coffee. Sometimes Lily sat beside him, curled in a blanket on the office couch with her sketchbook. She would draw while he worked, her crayons scratching across the page, filling the silence with color. One evening, near midnight, Lily looked up from her drawing. Arthur's head had dipped dangerously close to the desk, his pencil slipping from his fingers. "Daddy," she whispered, tugging his sleeve. He stirred, blinking. You're tired. Maybe you should sleep." Arthur smiled faintly, brushing her hair back from her forehead. "I will, sweetheart. Just a little longer. I promise." Lily frowned, then held up her sketch. It was a picture of a tall building, sturdy and proud, with her and her father standing at the top, hand in hand. "This is what you're building, right?" she asked. Arthur's chest tightened. He studied the drawing, her version of his dreams, and nodded. "Yes, exactly that." Her smile was small but radiant. "Then you can't give up." Arthur didn't know he was being watched. From the shadows of the hallway, Isabella Sterling stood with her arms folded, her expression unreadable. She had been leaving after a late board call when she noticed the faint light under the engineering office door. Curiosity, or perhaps something else, had pulled her closer. Through the glass, she saw him. Arthur bent over the desk, his suit jacket discarded, sleeves rolled up, brow furrowed in focus. Beside him, the little girl, her blonde head bowed over her sketchbook, humming softly to herself. The sight struck Isabella in a place she had long locked away. For years she had prided herself on ruthlessness, on never bending to sentiment. Yet here was a man, not extraordinary by pedigree, not polished by wealth, but driven by something far rarer: devotion. She remembered her own childhood nights, sitting alone in a cavernous dining room, while her father barked orders into a phone. The echo of clinking silverware, the absence of laughter. No one had ever stayed late to keep her company. No one had sacrificed their world for her. But Arthur did. For his daughter. Every night. For the first time in years, Isabella felt something shift. The following morning, Arthur presented his revised schematics to the engineering board. His voice was calm, precise, his solutions clear and innovative. The executives had expected a disaster. Instead, they were handed brilliance. Gerald Hunt squinted at the papers, his lips pressed thin. "You stayed all night to finish this?" Arthur didn't flinch. "Yes, because it matters." Murmurs rippled around the table. Even those who had scoffed at him couldn't deny the quality of his work. But it was Isabella who broke the silence. Sitting at the head of the table, she lifted one page delicately between her fingers, her gaze sweeping over the clean corrections and bold solutions. Then her eyes met Arthur's. "You've done more than complete a task," she said evenly. "You've reminded this company what dedication looks like." A flush of warmth spread through Arthur's chest. For the first time, he felt not like an outsider, but like a man who might belong. And though he couldn't name it yet, something in Isabella's gaze told him this was only the beginning. The city glittered beneath the night sky, but Isabella Sterling sat alone in her penthouse, a glass of untouched wine resting on the marble counter. The floor-to-ceiling windows framed Manhattan like a kingdom, yet it often felt more like a cage. Her phone buzzed with messages, investors seeking answers, journalists chasing statements, but she ignored them. Instead, she found herself staring at an old photograph she kept locked away in a drawer. It was faded at the edges, a little girl with long blonde hair, standing stiffly beside a boy a few years older. Both wore pressed uniforms, both smiling faintly for the camera. Her younger brother, Michael. He had been the only light in her childhood home. While their father barked orders and charted empires, Michael had made her laugh, sneaking her cookies from the kitchen, whispering stories past bedtime. He was her safe place, the one person who reminded her they were still children, in a house that demanded they be soldiers. And then, one winter night, everything shattered. Their father had insisted on a business trip despite a looming storm. Michael had begged to go, desperate to prove himself worthy in their father's eyes. The car skidded on the icy road. Only Charles Sterling survived. Isabella was 12 when she stood by her brother's grave, her father's hand heavy on her shoulder. His words still rang in her ears. "Grief is weakness. Don't let it destroy you. You will carry the Sterling name now." From that day forward, Isabella learned to bury softness. She became ice, steel, a fortress no one could breach. Men, in particular, earned no trust. To her, they were either reckless like Michael or ruthless like her father creatures, who abandoned, disappointed, or demanded too much. She had built her empire on control, on never letting anyone close enough to harm her. Love was an illusion, a trap for the foolish. And yet, in the sterile glow of the boardroom, she had seen Arthur Miller bent over schematics with his daughter at his side. She had watched him sacrifice sleep, comfort, even dignity, without complaint. Not for glory, not for money, but for love. That image had unsettled her. It cracked something she had long thought impenetrable. For the first time in years, Isabella found herself asking a dangerous question. What if not all men left? What if some stayed? She set the photograph face down and rose from her chair, pacing the length of her penthouse. The thought of Arthur stirred a heat in her chest. She couldn't name part admiration, part fear. She hated the vulnerability it brought. Still, as she looked out at the glittering city, She couldn't shake the memory of Lily's tiny voice in the boardroom, pointing out a forgotten label with innocent pride, nor the sight of Arthur smiling at her, patient and kind, even under humiliation. Against every instinct, Isabella Sterling, the Ice Queen, was beginning to thaw. For weeks, Arthur's reputation inside Sterling Enterprises had been slowly shifting. Where once whispers mocked him as the charity case, now murmurs carried grudging respect. His designs were sharp, his work ethic undeniable. Some junior engineers even began to look up to him, seeking guidance he gave freely and humbly. But admiration breeds envy. Late one Friday afternoon, a storm broke inside the boardroom. Gerald Hunt, the operations director, slammed a folder onto the table. "We have a serious problem," he announced, his voice dripping with triumph rather than concern. "It appears Mr. Miller has stolen proprietary designs from our competitors and presented them as his own." Gasps rippled across the table. Arthur, seated near the end, stiffened in disbelief. "That's a lie," he said firmly. "I've never—" Gerald cut him off, flipping open the folder to reveal printed emails and schematics stamped with another firm's watermark. "The evidence speaks for itself. Confidential files were accessed under your login, Mr. Miller. How do you explain this?" Arthur's stomach dropped. He had no explanation, because he hadn't done it. "This is absurd," he said, his voice tightening. "I would never jeopardize my integrity. Someone planted this." The executives exchanged skeptical glances. Gerald smirked, savoring every second. Convenient excuse. Perhaps Sterling Enterprises has been too generous with charity hires. The word stung sharper than any blade. Arthur's mind raced. He thought of Lily, of the roof over their heads, of the fragile hope he had begun to feel here. Was it all about to vanish, snatched away by lies? All eyes turned to Isabella. She sat at the head of the table, perfectly still, her hands folded, her expression unreadable. The silence stretched until it felt unbearable. Finally she spoke. "Leave us," she commanded the other executives. Gerald bristled. "But Miss Sterling—" "Now." Her voice carried ice and authority. Reluctantly they filed out, their footsteps fading, until only Arthur and Isabella remained. Arthur met her gaze, his chest tight. "I didn't do this," he said hoarsely. "You have to believe me." For the first time since he had met her, Isabella's composure cracked. A flicker of conflict crossed her face. Her empire had been built on ruthlessness. Instinct told her to cut him loose, to shield the company from scandal. Yet something in his eyes, raw, unwavering, desperate, held her still. Before she could respond, the boardroom door burst open. Lily ran in, her backpack bouncing, her cheeks flushed from the sprint up the stairs. She clutched her sketchbook to her chest. "Please don't fire my daddy," she cried, her small voice breaking the heavy silence. Tears welled in her eyes as she looked directly at Isabella. "He's all I have. He's the best person in the world. He helps everyone. He helps me every day. He would never steal anything." Arthur froze, his heart breaking at the sight of his daughter defending him. He knelt quickly, wrapping his arms around her. "Lily," he whispered. But Isabella couldn't look away from the child. Her own memories surged, nights spent alone, waiting for a father who never came, wishing someone would fight for her the way Lily fought for Arthur now. Isabella rose slowly from her chair, her heels clicking softly against the polished floor. She approached them, her gaze locked on Arthur. "I want to believe you," she said quietly. "But if you're lying, if you've betrayed this company, you'll destroy everything I've built." Arthur straightened, his arm around Lily, his voice steady. "Then look me in the eye, Miss Sterling. You'll see the truth. I have nothing to hide." The moment hung, suspended, electric. For the first time in years, Isabella Sterling faced a choice not dictated by contracts or shareholders but by trust. And as she looked into Arthur's eyes, she felt the ground shift beneath her. The silence in the boardroom was suffocating. Isabella's eyes never left Arthur's, searching for any flicker of deceit. All she found was exhaustion, bruised pride, and the quiet fire of a man who had nothing left but truth. "Very well," she said at last. "If you claim you're innocent, we'll find proof." Arthur nodded, his jaw set. "Please, do it." The next morning, Isabella ordered the IT department to conduct a full audit of the system logs. Gerald Hunt protested, calling it a waste of resources, but her word was law. The audit revealed something peculiar. Arthur's login had been used to access confidential competitor files, but from a computer Arthur had never touched, in a part of the building he had no clearance to enter. Even stranger, the access occurred at a time Arthur had been logged in elsewhere, working late in the engineering department. Security footage confirmed it. Arthur hunched over his desk, sleeves rolled up. Lily asleep on the couch beside him. The evidence cleared him, but the question remained. Who had set him up? Isabella called Arthur into her office late one evening. The city glittered beyond the glass, casting a halo of light around her. "I believe you now," she said quietly. Arthur exhaled, relief flooding his chest. "Thank you. But belief isn't enough," Isabella continued, her tone sharp. "We need proof of who did this. Gerald Hunt is too careful to leave his fingerprints behind, unless we force him to." Arthur frowned. "A trap?" She gave a faint, cold smile. "Exactly." Together, they devised a plan. A fake project, an attractive but flawed design, was placed into Arthur's files. Bait for the saboteur. Isabella spread word subtly that the project would soon be presented to the board. If someone was watching Arthur's work, they wouldn't be able to resist. And Gerald couldn't. 2 nights later, the trap was sprung. It caught his credentials, accessing Arthur's files, attempting to copy and modify the design, as though it were his own. Security footage sealed it. Gerald, sneaking into the office after hours, smirking as he downloaded the bait. The next morning, Isabella strode into the boardroom with Arthur at her side. The executives looked up in confusion as she dropped the evidence folder onto the table. "Gentlemen, allow me to introduce your saboteur," she declared. Gasps rippled around the room. Gerald sputtered, color draining from his face. This is fabricated." "Fabricated?" Isabella's voice sliced through him. She turned to the screen behind her, where the footage played in crisp detail. Gerald caught red-handed. The board erupted in outrage. Within hours, Gerald Hunt was escorted from the building, his career in ruins. Arthur was vindicated. The following week, Sterling Enterprises unveiled the project Arthur had slaved over his designs, polished and precise, ready for presentation. The client was impressed, signing a multi-million-dollar contract that secured the company's future growth. At the press conference, Isabella stood before flashing cameras, her voice calm but resolute. "This project represents not only innovation, but integrity. And it is thanks to one man's brilliance and perseverance that we stand here today." She turned, gesturing for Arthur to join her. Arthur hesitated, the glare of cameras foreign and overwhelming. But when he saw Lily in the crowd, waving wildly with a grin that could light the entire room, his steps grew steadier. Standing beside Isabella, he felt something he hadn't in years: dignity. The applause that followed was not mockery but genuine respect. That evening, the 3 of them, Arthur, Lily, and Isabella, found themselves walking together in Central Park. The air was cool, the city alive with lights. Lily skipped ahead, clutching her sketchbook, leaving Arthur and Isabella side by side. "You risked a lot for me," Arthur said quietly. Isabella glanced at him, her blonde waves catching the lamplight. "I don't take risks," she replied. Then, softer, "Except, maybe with people." Arthur studied her, the woman the world called the Ice Queen. Yet he had seen her defend a child in the lobby, stand by him in the boardroom, and even smile, rare, fleeting, but real. "You're not as cold as they say," he murmured. She raised an eyebrow, smirking faintly. "Careful, Mr. Miller. Flattery won't get you promoted." He chuckled. But the moment lingered, heavier than jest. Their hands brushed briefly as they walked, and though neither pulled away, neither dared to say more. Ahead, Lily stopped, turning to wave. Come on, Daddy. Come on, Miss Sterling. Arthur's heart swelled. For the first time in years, the future didn't feel like a burden. It felt like hope. Days later, as Arthur prepared to leave the office, he found Isabella waiting by the elevator. She held a small envelope in her hand. "What's this?" he asked. "Your official contract," she said simply. "Full-time, head engineer." "You earned it." Arthur opened the envelope, his throat tightening. The salary was more than enough to rebuild his life, to give Lily everything she deserved. He looked up, gratitude etched deep in his expression. "Thank you," he whispered. Isabella's gaze lingered on him, unreadable yet softened. "Don't thank me. Just keep proving me right." Their eyes held longer than either expected. And for once, Isabella didn't feel like the ice queen of Wall Street. She felt like a woman standing at the edge of something terrifyingly human. Something she hadn't let herself believe in for a long, long time. Weeks later, Lily sat on a park bench, sketching a picture of 3 figures holding hands under a crooked-roofed house. She looked up at Arthur and Isabella, standing close, their conversation low but warm, their shoulders brushing in the soft spring sunlight. She grinned, clutching her sketchbook. To her, the picture was already true. A family. Spring unfurled across New York like a long-awaited promise. The bitter winds faded. Central Park bloomed with daffodils and cherry blossoms, and the city that had once seemed gray to Arthur Miller now shimmered with possibility. Life was changing in ways he could scarcely believe. Arthur's new office wasn't lavish. He hadn't asked for lavish, but it was his. His nameplate gleamed on the door. Head engineer. For the first time in years, he walked into work with shoulders lifted, no longer weighed down by shame. His colleagues greeted him not with whispers but with nods of respect. Some even sought his guidance, and he offered it freely. In the evenings, he no longer came home exhausted and hollow. Instead, he carried takeout dinners for Lily, who would chatter about her day while showing him new sketches, castles, bridges, fantastical buildings with crooked towers and star-shaped windows. Every time he looked at her, he knew all of this was worth it. Isabella Sterling was changing too, though she tried not to admit it. The press still called her the Ice Queen. But insiders began noticing subtle shifts. She lingered longer in the engineering department, checking on projects she never used to care about. She hosted fewer sterile parties for investors and more quiet dinners with her team. But the most striking change was invisible to the public. In private moments, Isabella allowed herself to laugh, to feel. The first time Arthur heard her laugh, really laugh, it startled him. They had been walking Lily home from school, and the little girl had proudly announced, "Miss Sterling, you dress like a princess, but you drive like my dad slow." Arthur froze, mortified, but Isabella burst into laughter, a sound like glass breaking into sunlight. Lily giggled with her, and Arthur found himself smiling, his chest warm. Isabella hadn't laughed like that since her brother was alive. Their lives began to intertwine naturally. Isabella started joining Arthur and Lily for small outings. A picnic in the park. An art fair where Lily won second place for her drawing. A weekend trip to the museum. At first, she hovered at the edges, unsure of her place. But Lily never let her stay there. The little girl tugged her hand, pulled her into games, demanded she sit beside them at lunch. Isabella found herself softening, letting Lily braid her hair clumsily, even letting Arthur tease her about her terrible attempts at drawing. One evening, after Lily had gone to bed, Arthur and Isabella sat together on his small Brooklyn balcony. The city stretched before them, glittering. Arthur handed her a cup of tea instead of wine. "You don't have to do this," he said quietly. "Do what?" she asked, sipping. "Be here. With us. You're a CEO. Isabella. You belong in penthouses, not on a balcony with a single dad and his kid." Her gaze lingered on him, steady and soft. "Maybe I've had enough of penthouses. Maybe this is exactly where I belong." Arthur's heart hammered, but he didn't push further. Some things, he knew, needed time. Weeks later, at a company gala, Isabella made a choice that shocked everyone. Standing at the podium in her crimson gown, cameras flashing, she spoke not of profits or growth, but of values. This company thrives because of people who give everything they have, not just to their work, but to the people they love. Integrity, devotion, sacrifice. These are not weaknesses, they are strengths, and I see them embodied in one man. Arthur Miller. The spotlight shifted. Arthur, seated near the back with Lily, stiffened. All eyes turned toward him. But Isabella's gaze never wavered. In a world that dismisses devotion as weakness, he reminded us what true strength looks like. She continued. And for that, I am grateful, not just as a CEO, but as a person. The applause was thunderous. Arthur's throat tightened. Lily clapped wildly, shouting, "That's my dad!" For Isabella, it was more than a speech, it was a declaration. That night, after the gala ended, Isabella found Arthur outside beneath the glittering lights of the city. He stood with Lily asleep in his arms, her head on his shoulder, her sketchbook clutched against his chest. "You were brave tonight," Arthur murmured. "So were you," Isabella replied. Their eyes held. For a long moment, the noise of the city faded. The Ice Queen and the single father stood together in quiet recognition of everything they had endured: loss, judgment, sacrifice, and everything they might yet build. Arthur shifted Lily gently, then whispered, "I don't know what this is, Isabella, but I know it feels right." Her lips curved, tender and unguarded. "It does." She reached out, brushing her fingers lightly over Lily's hair, before letting her hand linger near his. Their hands brushed, then clasped, steady and sure. A week later, in Central Park, Lily unveiled her newest drawing. It showed 3 figures beneath a crooked roofed house: Arthur, Lily, and Isabella, standing hand in hand, smiling. "This is us," Lily said proudly. Arthur's eyes stung. Isabella, for once, didn't argue. She only smiled, her hand tightening around Arthur's, as they watched Lily run ahead, laughter trailing through the spring air. The single dad who had once been rejected, the CEO who had once been ice, they had found in each other what neither thought possible. And for the first time in a long time, the future felt like home.